The hour has come for our Canadian Anti-Monopoly Project launch event. So if you're here joining us, we're going to hang out for another 2 minutes, let people get their lunches together so they can join us. So hang tight and we'll get started in about 2 minutes. Okay, are we ready to go? Okay, well, welcome everyone to our first ever event put on by the Canadian Anti-Monopoly Project, or as we like to call it, CAMP. We're really happy to have you here with us today to celebrate the launch of this new organization. And today we're going to be having a conversation to talk about the role of an anti-monopoly perspective in ensuring democratic control of our economy and a fair distribution of economic prosperity in our society. If you don't know me, my name is Robin Shaban, and I'm a co-founder of CAMP along with Keldon Bester and Andrew Cameron, who are also here with us today. For today's conversation, we're joined by two of the leading lights of the global anti-monopoly conversation, and we're really thrilled to have them here with us today. Barry Lynn is the executive director of the Open Markets Institute and is a pioneer of our understanding of how the monopolies of the 21st century threaten our democracy, individual liberties, security, and prosperity. His work on anti-monopoly law and thinking for the digital era has been fully embraced by the Biden administration and has shaped the thinking of policymakers and scholars around the globe. Stacy Mitchell is the co-executive director of the Institute for Local Self-Reliance and has produced pivotal research and reporting on the policies driving the decline of small businesses and the economic and political consequences of monopoly power. In 2022, political strategy firm Barron named her an antitrust super influencer for her role in shaping the policy debate. The organization she co-leads, ILSR, has been a pioneering leader in the growing anti-monopoly movement and has a long track record of working alongside grassroots groups to develop better alternatives. So before we launch into our panel conversation today, I'd like to just take some time to talk about CAMP. CAMP is a think tank, and we're dedicated to addressing the structural issues caused by monopoly power in Canada. Massive concentrations of wealth and economic power held by private interests, like individuals, families, or corporations, are fundamentally inconsistent with a liberal democratic society. When a handful of monopolists have the power to influence prices we pay for goods and services, our ability to start and grow businesses, the amount that we get paid for our labor, and even the decisions that our governments make through lobbying, it undermines the fairness of our economy and the validity of our democracy. The genesis for CAMP came out of a need to not only talk about these issues, but also develop solutions to address them. Our vision for CAMP and our vision at CAMP is to have a society where everyone, regardless of the wealth or privilege that they were born into, can participate in the economy on fair terms. We envision an economy where everyone, entrepreneurs, businesses, workers, and consumers can participate in the economy without fear of exclusion, coercion, or exploitation. We want an economy where everyone has the ability to support themselves, meet their material needs, and have control over their own lives and communities. If we don't take action now to curb monopolies and their power in our society, we may miss our chance to put Canada on a trajectory to a fair and prosperous future for everyone. Now I'm going to turn things over to Keldon, and he's going to talk more about what CAMP does and our current initiatives. And once Keldon is done, he's going to pass things on to Andrew, who's going to be leading the conversation with Stacy and Barry. So, Keldon, to you.
Thanks so much, Robin. So as an organization, I think CAMP has three real objectives. The first is to conduct research that unpacks the impact of monopoly on Canadians and provide meaningful solutions to those problems. The second is to build a community of researchers, activists, and advocates, kind of a home for anti-monopoly thinking and for people who really want to improve the fairness of our economy. And finally, it's to develop a robust organization that can, participate in this fight over the long term, because there's energy now, but it really is a long-term fight. And Barry and Stacy have been working on this for a long time, and are a testament to the long-term nature of the work that needs to be done. We're already doing some of this work. We have numerous media appearances and op-eds talking about the relationship between monopoly and inflation, the ongoing Rogers-Shaw merger, and raising awareness around the weakness of our current laws. But Robin in particular has also appeared before Parliament numerous times, more times than the past three commissioners of competition combined, actually, discussing these same topics, as well as the role of small and medium-sized enterprises and the role of competition in Canada's economy. We're also starting to build a coalition of organizations that are passionate about creating a fair economy, both through regular outreach and our recurring competition policy discussion group for Canadian policy analysts. But I would like to note that CAMP is just one piece of this conversation, and the work of our other colleagues, such as Vas Bednar at McMaster, has really been instrumental in building up this competition conversation in Canada. So it's a group project, of course. And that has led today in a situation where it appears that the government is interested in opening up a consultation on Canada's competition law, the Competition Act. And so that's really the biggest next milestone in terms of the anti-monopoly fight in Canada is this consultation. And it's an exciting opportunity, but the real danger is that this consultation is dominated by status quo voices that have a financial interest in maintaining a weak set of laws that focus on concentrating power as opposed to protecting people from monopoly. So, in the short term, CAMP has two big goals. First, is to articulate the CAMP vision of where these laws need to go for a more democratic and fair economy. But secondly, and more importantly, is to support organizations and individuals that need to be in this conversation, but that are typically left out. So if you're part of an organization or know an organization that you feel should be participating and having their voice heard in a discussion of the Competition Act, really reach out to us, because we want to offer that support. And to make all this happen, we ask for your help in effecting this kind of change, and that can come in big and small ways. If you haven't already, please follow us on social media and join our newsletter at antimonopoly.ca. Any kind of support is meaningful. There's, of course, financial donations, but time and expertise to support this work, whether that's research, communications, even the governance of the organization. That's really important to us as well. So if you are interested in getting involved, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'd love to chat with you. But enough about camp. I think there's a more exciting conversation to happen today. So I'm going to pass it over to Andrew and our guests to lead the discussion.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Robin and Keldon. Like both of you said, I'm very excited and happy to be here at this point. I know I sort of joined this fight in Canada sort of later than Robin and Keldon, and like I said, everybody else that's been pushing this fight forward, but I'm glad to be part of this. I'm glad for us to get started and move this organization ahead. Quick 2-line summary of who I am. I live in Amherst, Nova Scotia. I'm a small business owner. I come from a family of small business owners. And that's kind of how I got into this discussion. And I feel like sometimes my role is to translate sort of the detailed policy discussion around competition into sort of simple, like day-to-day life terms. So I started hosting a podcast called Monopolies Killed My Hometown to explore that sort of relationship. So that's a quick rundown of who I am. I want to get to Barry and Stacy, and we're going to open it up. I think both Barry and Stacy have a few opening remarks they kind of want to share us with to tell us more about them and their history and what they've worked on and what they've accomplished. So we'll pass it to Barry. If you want to unmute yourself and get started, that would be excellent.
Well, thank you all. And, Keldon and Robin and Andrew, it's really great to have you as part of this movement. And it's great to see Stacy and be with Stacy at this event. It's really exciting to have sort of Canada back at the table on this issue. Canada has played an enormously important role in establishing the structures of the modern democratic, of modern liberal democracy. After the Second World War, Canada was a founding member of the G7 and was, played a hugely important role in sort of establishing the, democracy, reestablishing democracy and sort of a functioning political economy in Europe after the war. So it's, sometimes, I think Canadians forget how important their role has been and the power that they can actually bring to bear. I just want to, there's one other thing. I really love the word camp, the name camp. It's really this, anti-monopoly is really all about, it's about home, it's about family, it's just about, people being people together. That's what, anti-monopoly is, to get the intermediaries out of our life. It's about getting people, around the same campfire in a way. And one little note, I'm just thrilled that we're here with Keldon, because Keldon was somebody who was an intern here at Open Markets a few years back, and in 2018. Keldon actually played a huge role in putting together this an amicus brief that we wrote on AT&T the appeal of the AT&T Time Warner case that had been brought by the antitrust, the Department of Justice to try and block that merger. One thing is the appeal did not work, but the court did actually mention that they did sort of refer to our document, and they said, had the DOJ made that argument, we might actually held for you. So it's really great to be here with Keldon. So real quick, it's like, what is, I'm just going to make a couple points. What is anti-monopoly? Anti-monopoly is democracy. Anti-monopoly is individual liberty. Anti-monopoly is opportunity. It's responsibility. It's actually creating a space where you can be responsible. It's creating the opportunity to be responsible, to play a role in building a better society and building a better world. People tend to look at, antitrust and monopoly as something that's very technical. It's really, anti-monopoly is, philosophically, it's the coding that we use to regulate competition within our society among people, and groups of people, to ensure that competition is constructive rather than destructive, to ensure that competition promotes better democracy and doesn't destroy democracy, that competition is structured to promote individual liberty and opportunity. So, this is, competition policy is it's the coding that we use to build a better society, to structure a better society. And institutionally, it's what the entire state does. And, this actually is it's an important point, because it gets at, how did we get into this problem that we have today, which is monopolies everywhere, all around the world. And that was, what happened is, for 200 years in the United States, and, we had anti-monopoly, we had a very effective anti-monopoly regime. And it was foundational to our democracy. It was foundational to our national power. It was foundational to our ability to sort of overcome the great challenges that were internal, in the sense of the plutocrats and the Gilded Age, but also external, to be able to concentrate the power we needed to overcome the threat of Nazism in Europe, and then what happened is that 40 years ago, the neoliberals came along and they said, hey, let's get rid of this policy that we've been using to such amazing effect, to make ourselves free, to make the world free, and said, well, let's actually change this policy so that the point of it is to make ourselves more materially wealthy. And they said, rather than aiming at preserving democracy, we're going to aim at preserving or promoting efficiency. And so they radically changed the purpose of anti-monopoly from democracy to efficiency. And then they sort of brought in a whole group of people to judge how we do this, and that was the economists. So we're going to get rid of regular people. We're going to get rid of jury of your peers. We're going to get rid of all the traditional ways that we pursued democracy here and in other countries, and we're going to replace ourselves as judges of what is a danger to our democracy with a bunch of economists, and they're going to be the judges of what is a danger. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to shrink all this policy down into a couple little boxes, what the DOJ does, what the FTC does, whereas traditionally, competition policy is what the entire state does. It's what the government does. We use every part of our state to make ourselves free, to make our democracy strong, to make our nation secure, to help other nations, our allies, our friends, seek, more perfect democracies. So that's what, so what the neoliberals did is they overturned that with just the silliest, if you go back and look at it, it's just the silliest, stupidest set of arguments. And we fell for it. And now we wake up and we look around and the entire world is filled with monopolies that threaten not just our pocketbook, but our democracy. We got monopolies that are in our heads, that are telling us how to think, that are manipulating how we talk to one another. It is, this is the most dangerous threat to our lives today. Every single harm that we face in our world today, at some point in that harm, in the creation of that harm, there is a monopolist down that chain. They may be the main source of the problem, or they are taking that problem and making it worse. So this is every single harm that we want to deal with, whether it's climate, whether it's healthcare, whether it's peace, sort of the eliminating this conflict that's coming with China. The problem in every single case is monopolization, and sort of eliminating monopoly is going to help us get to the root cause and make the world a safer and happier and healthier and more sustainable place. So open markets, what do? It's like we're a bunch of lawyers. We have journalists. I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for a long time. And we're journalists and we're lawyers and researchers. And what we do is we shine a light on these problems as journalists, as lawyers. We tell a story, we remind people, we focus on the problem, and then we bring in some analysis so that people understand the history of how we dealt with this in the past. So we know that there are solutions, that there are common sense solutions that we've used in the past to the problems of today, that the principles of the past are useful in dealing with the problems of today. And then we push this analysis out. And we push this analysis out, through grassroots activism, through and direct engagement with policymakers, direct engagement with the regulators, and we've had a lot of success at this. And but we have a huge way to go, as Keldon was noting. Like, this is just the beginning of the process, and but just so we are clear about this, it's like we have, even though we have a long ways to go, we are winning and we will win. And so anyway, again, it's really terrific to see you all. And one last thing is, I just want to note that there's a growing number of groups around the world that are sort of focusing on this. There's the Balanced Economy Project that's based in the UK. There's a new group that's being fostered by Lobby Control in Germany, and there's other groups that are sort of starting to form in South Africa and Brazil. So this is truly an international movement, and it's great to have you guys.
Thank you very much, Barry. Appreciate all the words. I think it's a good thing we're recording this. There's a lot in even the 10 minutes or so that you're speaking. I think so it'll be good. People can go back and listen again and hear some more. I think one thing that I really took away from that is, I think as Canadians, we kind of forget, we'll say, how much we can actually kind of do and bring to the world and bring to these discussions. Robin or Keldon or even Barry or Stacy may remember more of the dates, but I think one of the things I learned originally is I think Canada actually passed the first official competition laws, like the sort of modern competition laws, in 1890 something. So maybe I'll still try to take credit for that. But anyways, thank you, Barry. We'll hop over to Stacy now. Just for Stacy to offer a few opening thoughts and opening remarks.
Well, thank you so much. It's really terrific to be here, and I enjoyed getting to know Keldon and Robin and Andrew. Andrew and I are a little bit neighbors. I'm in Maine, and so we feel a lot of connection in this part of the world with Nova Scotia and with the eastern part of Canada, and so it's really nice to be here. And I'm so excited about this launch and just to see the way that this movement is growing. Both in the US and across the world and in Canada. And so this is great and always lovely and sort of an honor to be speaking alongside Barry. I wanted to, I guess, just start in some ways building a little on what Barry said and just talking about what anti-monopoly is. And it's really, in some sense, another way of talking about what democracy is. We understand that if you're going to set up a system of organizing your society that safeguards liberty, that ensures that we all collectively have the ability to decide how our communities, how our nation is going to operate, then you inherently need to have mechanisms that prevent the tyrannical accumulation and exercise of power. And we understand this in the context of having checks and balances on different branches of government. So that no particular branch of government, or between the national government and the provinces, for example, that there's always a check and balance, that nobody can accumulate so much power and begin to exercise it in tyrannical ways. And that's essential to how you set up a democracy. And similarly, it's essential that you also have mechanisms for checking private power, that the accumulation of private power is just as dangerous, if not more so, to a democracy. And so inherent in how you design your society, you need to have anti-monopoly in order to have a democracy. And that's, as a broad idea, that goes back, well, in this part of the world, in sort of Eastern North America, it goes back a really, really long ways, long before Europeans were here. The peoples who inhabited this region of the world had very well developed political mechanisms to safeguard liberty, to ensure that no one was subject to the coercive power of another. And those ideas very much influenced the European Enlightenment, and then of course led to North American democracy. But as old as those ideas are, as Barry noted, they've really been utterly buried and lost in a lot of ways in the frameworks that we've been operating in for 40 years now. We've very much taken those ideas and submerged them in a very dangerous ideology that basically says that how economic power is distributed, who has it, how it functions is not a political question. It's somehow not a political question. It somehow has nothing to do with what it means to be a free and self-governing people. We've been trained to sort of see the economy as being like the weather, that it just kind of operates out there, and government can sort of interfere in it, but otherwise it's just, it operates of its own accord. And this of course is utterly ridiculous. Markets are always and everywhere structured by rules, and the question is, who decides what those rules are and what ends do they serve? And so this is really, the kind of thinking that we've been living with for a long time is a very much that there aren't any rules and that we should look at them is a tall tale told by the powerful in order to be able to rig those rules to their own advantage, and rig them they have. Not only have they destroyed our antitrust and competition policies, not only have they accumulated incredible amounts of power in Wall Street banks and consolidated control over our economic resources and our capital, rigged the tax system, such that, here in the US anyway, Amazon pays an effective tax rate that is well below what the neighborhood store at the end of your street pays. I mean, on and on and on, all in the service of accumulating power and wealth. And of course, today we find that our liberty has been curtailed by monopoly power in so many ways, whether it's, the ability to direct what our government does, to participate in fair markets, to live in communities that have the capacity and the means to direct their own future. So my organization, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, ILSR, we were founded in 1974 with this idea that democracy is healthiest when you disperse power, when you disperse economic power widely, and that really democracy, the foundation of democracy, is very much at the local level. It's in the ability of people to get together with their neighbors and have the sort of capacity and ability to decide how to organize themselves to meet their needs. That is the really, the building blocks for democracy all the way up is at that very local and grassroots and community level. These are the ideas that the folks who founded my organization in 1974, came to it with. But at a time, of course, when that kind of thinking was at best considered to be quaint, and at worst considered to be stupid and misguided. And so for the early decades of ILSR's existence, we didn't have a lot of traction at the federal level, and not a whole lot of sort of allies and opportunities to work there. And so for many decades, we very much worked at the local level, because that's where we could find allies and traction for these ideas. So we've, over the decades have done a lot to, to challenge concentrated corporate power at the local level, and have found, that kind of dominant ideology of bigness really isn't operational at the local level, because people are actually having to deal with the rubber meets the road. They're having to deal with the consequences of concentrated corporate power, and they are trying to find ways to address it. So we've worked with communities across the country to defeat incinerators, which were tooled by powerful waste companies to gain control over the waste system. Instead, we helped communities build recycling and composting based systems that decentralized that power, made that power local. We've helped literally hundreds of communities build publicly owned broadband networks. We've defeated a lot of absentee corporations from coming in, like Walmart, and helped communities strengthen local businesses, done a lot of work around community banks and so on, and have done this work in big cities and little towns and in liberal and conservative places. I guess, just to sort of wrap up, I would say that there are really kind of maybe three kind of critical things that we've learned from that might be from those many years of work that might be useful as you're thinking about setting up camp and the work that you do. And of course, now, over the last 6 or 7 years, we've been able to do a lot of national and federal work, thanks to the conversation that really, I think Barry's been incredibly instrumental in opening up and driving at the federal level around antitrust policy. But just share, I think, three kind of key things that we've learned in doing that work. One is that concentrated power has huge impacts on the ground, and that it can be easy to talk about monopoly sort of up here and who controls what industries and that sort of thing. But really, the power of the message, I think, lies in talking about how it actually functions at the ground level. We know that it is a primary driver of wage stagnation and inequality. We know that concentrated economic power has killed countless small and mid-sized businesses and left communities really bereft of economic opportunity. It's led to these incredible regional disparities across the US, whole regions that have been left behind and excluded because their businesses have been swallowed up or pushed out of the market. And now they're controlled by companies that are headquartered in Seattle or New York or what have you. We know, I guess, too, that at the grassroots level, so the second thing is that at the grassroots level, everyone is an anti-monopolist, or I should say just about everyone. They may not know this language, but everyone has a problem with corporate power controlling their community and their lives. And there are lots of people across Canada and across the US that are fighting monopoly power in one way or another. They may not conceptualize it that way. It may be about the big utility that's preventing them from connecting their own community solar to the grid. It may be a fight about what's happening on Main Street and businesses being wiped out by big retailers. It may be the fact that the big bank in your town won't give you a loan for a productive investment. I mean, all of these fights really at their root are about the same thing. They're about concentrated monopoly power. And part of the opportunity that you have is to frame those things as being connected and being about the same thing and helping people see those fights together. And then lastly, the thing we've really learned is that economies of scale is that idea is bogus. As Barry said, we've all been enthralled to these misguided economic theories that have been a kind of pseudoscience that has run our policy for way too long and have led us to blindly believe that small is inherently inefficient and outdated and so on, and that big is better and the way to go. And we, through our research, have demonstrated that that's not true, that community banks are lower cost and deliver more productive capital than big banks do, that independent pharmacies provide better healthcare and lower prescription drug prices than the big chains do, that distributed retail is a better way to organize production and distribution, that the lowest cost and fastest broadband networks are small and locally owned. And I could go on and on. The reason that those small scale entities are disappearing is not because they can't compete. It's because the big guys have rigged the rules to amass power. And with that, I will turn it back over to you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you once again, Stacy. I'll say the same thing again. I'm glad we're recording this. I think you can go back and listen to what you had to say many times and pick something else new out of all of it. I was going to throw in the one that baffles me on the talking about small versus big is when conversations about big businesses being the most innovative. And I'm just like, it's always been historically, if you want something innovative, you always go to like the small company, but somehow we started thinking that we should just get the biggest companies to innovate and make things new. Anyways, that's one that kind of baffled me. But I think, Stacy, you talked a lot about things that resonated with me about small towns and small businesses being left behind by the corporate power and consolidated corporate power. And when I moved back home to Amherst, I was gone for over 15 years coming back. And like I said, it was the same town, but it felt different. And I couldn't figure out what it was, but thinking about the changes in the town and what I remember and what I felt was missing led me to sort of the anti-monopoly fight. And I think I'd like to pose this question to Barry first, because like Stacy said, Barry, I think you're generally viewed as sort of the first voice or one of the first voices at moving this forward. So I'm kind of curious. For me, it was seeing the effects on Amherst, my hometown, which led me to this to this fight and to this movement. And I'm kind of curious, Barry, what was it for you that, was first pointed you in this direction or said, this is a problem?
Yeah, it's a great question. And because everyone who comes here comes through a different portal, a different, there was something that they saw that alerted them to the understanding that there were concentrations of power and control and capacity. In my case, it was controls of capacity. And I used to run a magazine that was called the Global Business Magazine, and there was an earthquake in Taiwan in 1999 that resulted in a few days in the shutdown of all of these factories all across the United States, because the earthquake disrupted the shipment of semiconductors from Hsinchu in Taiwan to California, to Texas, to elsewhere. And so this was, back, this is the hot, exciting days of radical globalization, and globalization was supposed to equal more of everything, every place. Yet here was proof that all of something really important was in one place. And that we'd put all our eggs in one basket. So that was, we all know you don't put all your eggs in one basket. And so that was my pathway into this, was just saying, well, whose ideas were responsible for us doing something that was so fantastically unwise, so fantastically dangerous? And just so we understand, just to link that to where we are today, I wrote a book in 2005 that was about the fragilities of our supply chains because of this hyper concentration. And it was in the process of writing that I came to understand what the neoliberals had accomplished, what Robert Bork and Richard Posner had accomplished, which was this overturning, not just of a set of policies that were designed to promote opportunity and democracy, but a set of policies that had actually overturned our security in fundamental ways. And here we are today now, actually dealing with these problems in a very real way. These supply chain disruptions of the last 2.5 years are really terrifying. And it's a proof that we haven't solved these problems. But that was my pathway in.
Yeah, I come from sort of the construction real estate world, and I remember, I think it was 2021, there was all the power outages in Texas, and plants were shut down there, and then all of a sudden we couldn't get paint up here, and the price of styrofoam skyrocketed because I guess there's one plant in Texas that makes this one polymer that goes into like all the styrofoam and all the paint like across North America. So all of a sudden I'm paying more because power's out in Texas. So yes, anyway, I see that too. So Stacy, how about you? What was your sort of pathway to kind of the anti-monopoly movement? And
yeah, I started working at ILSR a long time ago, like more than 20 years ago, when I was in my 20s. The organization, as I mentioned, always had a sort of decentralized power, kind of anti-monopoly orientations since the beginning. But how we came to sort of looking at antitrust policy more particularly is that beginning around 2000, I was sort of assigned to study this phenomenon of Walmart and big retailers, which were growing like crazy and killing off a lot of small businesses and just reorganizing the landscape and how we produced and distributed goods in like major ways. So I started studying this, and as it turned out at that time, if you were a community that had a Walmart maybe coming in and didn't want it or wanted to know what the impact was, there was nobody out there really doing much on that question. And so because we had published a few things, our phones started ringing off the hook, and communities reaching out to us to understand this and how could they say no and what were the implications and so on. And so I started traveling around and talking to people and working in all these places. And what I was seeing was that and hearing from local business owners and people who really are in the nitty gritty of how local economies and the retail system works, what was going on is that Walmart was coming into these communities and selling goods below cost, below its own cost. It would sell like its entire pharmacy and health and beauty section below cost to drive the local pharmacist out of business, or sort of household goods to drive the local department store out of business. And succeeding at that strategy. And it could lose money for a year more. I mean, it could lose money endlessly at any one location and make it up somewhere else. And the other thing that Walmart was doing was it was going to suppliers, and it was saying, we want a big discount. We want all these special terms, special packaging, and we don't want you to give those to our local competitors, only us. And that's how they were growing and massively taking over the economy. And I remember thinking, like, don't we have these laws, these, Standard Oil and antitrust? Don't we, because you can't just win by being big, right? You're supposed to play on a fair playing field. Like, you're just to win by being better. And so I started looking into it and ran across this law called the Robinson-Patman Act. And I was like, oh, here it is. Here's the law. Here's the thing that does what I thought it should do. And turns out it hasn't been enforced in decades. And that led me down the path of kind of understanding what had happened and what had gone wrong. And so that's how we got into antitrust.
So with the Robinson-Patman Act, what were the things that weren't being enforced, or what were the rules from that? Because like I remember, like in Amherst there was Zellers and there was Kmart, and like there was these chain stores, but they didn't basically eat all of the retail scene. They existed as part of it. But so I guess what was it that either changed in that act or in the enforcement of the act that let Walmart come in and eat everything?
Yeah, I mean, it's a law that says that you passed in 1936 in response, in a large part, to the power of A&P, which people often refer to as the kind of Walmart of its day, big national grocery chain. As it happens, actually at its height, much smaller in terms of market share and power than Walmart is today. Just to make that clear. But it says, you can't use your power to coerce suppliers into giving you special deals that are not available equally to other retailers. You can't use size and muscle to win or to control. Barry talked about the sort of revolution in thinking of the Bork and the Posner and so on, who came along and said, oh, it's all about antitrust should only be about efficiency. It should not be about distributing power, about fairness, and those other concepts that had been the way law was actively interpreted and created for decades. In the 1980s, it's only about efficiency. And we're only going to measure that in terms of consumer prices, and that was it. This very narrow view, and the courts and the enforcement agencies kind of in various ways mangled and reoriented all of the other antitrust laws to make them about this narrow aim when they never were about that narrow aim. With the Robinson-Patman Act, the problem that they encountered is that the plain language of the law says this is really about protecting fairness and having small competitors have a fair shot. So they couldn't somehow say it never meant what it meant, which is what they did with the other laws. It was just too much on its face. So the DOJ and the FTC basically put it up on a high shelf and said, oh, it doesn't really exist. And they just stopped enforcing it. It's a coup. Yeah, a coup.
Yeah, jump in, Barry, if you want to add anything to.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is it's a fundamentally important part of, for people to understand, is that, for most of our history, we were happy to have discount, people who would like discount the price of something, but there were very strict pricing rules throughout our society, throughout our political economy. And this is true also to this day in Germany, to this day in France, to this day in Japan. And that there are pricing rules both for the provision of services. This is like if you're buying services as a small business, you're buying services from some large company, or and this could be like warehousing services or whatever. And there were provisions to say you have to treat every single company, no matter how big they are, the same. You got to give them the same services at the same price. But then also the pricing, there's another pricing rules that were designed to sort of ensure that the big corporations were not able to loss lead, not able to cut their prices unfairly to the consumer as a way of gaining advantage over smaller independent companies. And this was, so we just had a rule that said, whatever it is that you're selling, a particular book, okay, this book has to be priced the same on Amazon and as it is at the local bookstore. And that way, Amazon has no advantage over the local bookstore. If you're in the local bookstore, you want to buy this book, you buy it because there's no reason to go on Amazon and buy it. Now, Amazon can still serve you. If you live far away from a bookstore, you can go on Amazon and wait for it to arrive. But that was the foundation of a distributed economy. That was a foundation of a democratized economy, was keeping the capitalists out of the position of the middleman, of control over the middleman. Retailers are middlemen. Transportation companies are middlemen. So we put restrictions on the retailer and the transportation company and all of the trading companies to make sure they weren't the pathway for the capitalists to take over control over our communities, over our businesses.
I almost think, I've been thinking about that too, that I almost, in Canada, maybe more that our telecom companies are so large, like some of our biggest ones, but to me, they feel like they should be lumped into that middle person role, like that intermediary. Like the telecoms are there to help you run your other business. Kind of like, to me, like the streets, or like I was thinking about like the water lines, or even like I think Stacy, you talked about broadband networks, like the community broadband networks. And I kind of want to know a bit more about that. Like, if you could talk about that, like some of the, say, sort of the community broadband networks, or some of the benefits, I guess, communities have seen from those networks that you've helped build or help those communities develop.
Yeah, they are in many cases, faster service, lower cost, right? So that you don't have this, rent seeking, monopoly broadband provider that's ripping people off. But I think a couple of other things that are really important is that they're responsive to community needs, because they're kind of controlled and run locally. And so the specific needs of the community, and we've certainly seen community-owned networks that have pricing provisions and even low-cost service for low-income people. So there's universal access, that there are various ways in which those networks can be used to meet public ends, and in a way that the big broadband providers are not going to do. So there's a lot of success there, and I think the part of the challenge has been that we've been conditioned for a long time as a society to imagine that we can't do these things ourselves on our own terms. We have to kind of wait at the local level for some big outside force to entity to come in and do this, or provide put a factory in, or put in whatever. And so sort of overcoming that has benefits beyond the broadband network, in the sense that you have a community that takes charge of that, and now they sort of realize their power to do all kinds of things. You're absolutely right about those networks being another form of middleman that has to be controlled. And of course, this is the tech company model as well, is we get control of the infrastructure, and from there we have extraordinary power across everything that has to every industry that has to connect with or use that infrastructure.
I'll just, this is such an important part of understanding the monopoly threat today, is, this, what you raised, Andrew, and what Stacy was just focusing on, but it's like, these networks, they're supposed to be providing us services. That's, a telecommunications network, a transportation network, traditionally, for in our country for 200 years, we ensured that every single network was neutral. We had very simple rules. Thou shalt not discriminate. If you're AT&T, if you are the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, thou shalt not discriminate. Thou shalt treat everybody the same. You're going to give them the same service at the same price. Also, thou shalt not vertically integrate. Thou shalt not get into other people's business, because, you know, especially businesses that depend on you to get to market. Those were the two primary rules. No discrimination, no vertical integration. Don't compete with your customers. Why do we have a Google problem today? Why do we have an Amazon problem today? Why do we have a Facebook problem today? Is because those corporations are the first in history, the first network corporations in history. And Google is a communications corporation. Facebook is a communications corporation. Amazon is a commercial corporation, an intermediary, a retail intermediary. These are the first communications and commercial corporations in history that we have allowed to discriminate in their treatment of people. They manipulate people. Their entire business model is built around that. That's what makes them so dangerous economically. It's what makes them so dangerous politically. Those are the two rules that we have to, that are most important to restore.
Yeah, I think talking about Amazon, Facebook, Google, I think it's an interesting sort of transition into the end, because they are international companies. They're all over the world right now. And I think we'll go back, we'll start with you, Stacy, and then Barry will come back to you for the last one. I think the anti-monopoly movement this time has got to be an international one. So I think the question is, you know, what are you looking forward? What are you hopeful in the growing international movement? And then what can we as Canadians focus on or help contribute to it?
That's great. That's a really great closing question. I'm sort of getting my thoughts together here. I think, I mean, first of all, I want to underscore what Barry said at the closing of his opening remarks, that we're going to win, and we are, and the forces of democracy. I think it's really exciting that, you know, for a long time, I felt like folks who were concerned about economic inequality, about what's happening in the environment, you know, all of the various issues that are out there. We were often in this conversation about the symptoms, and what the anti-monopoly movement has done is actually engage people in a conversation about the root causes. So we're now actually talking about the thing itself, and that is a huge advance. And when we're, you know, I think one of the things that's, you know, kind of worth thinking about is that the opportunity to really frame what this is about. Because, you know, it used to be, I mean, back in the days when communities were sort of fighting Walmart, and that was kind of, you know, one of the monopolists that was like, you know, front and center, that discussion at that time so often got framed in terms of like a kind of a weird cost benefit analysis of like, well, you know, they hurt workers and small businesses and they lower wages, but, you know, cheap prices, you know, how do we weigh those two things? And that's like, it's a dumb argument that, you know, you just isn't going to really lead you anywhere productive. And now we're talking about power. But the issue with Walmart is not, you know, that the symptoms are lowered wages and sprawl and all the other things, but that the real issue is that no company should be able to organize entire sectors of our economy, particularly our food system, single-handedly, right? That it's the power. And we're now having that conversation, and I think for a lot, you know, there are a number of reasons for that. I think Barry's work has been really pivotal in terms of framing that out. I also think the rise of big tech, because the nature of their power is so fundamental into the infrastructure that they effectively kind of govern or regulate our markets, that the way things operate now are according to their whims in a way that's very clear to people, that's also really helped us be in this conversation about power. So I think one of the things that's exciting and is really worth thinking about as you go forward with CAMP is you know, how you frame this issue, and then the room that gives you to move forward with it. I'm excited. I mean, some of the things I'm also excited about, it's been really, you know, one of my long-term projects is knitting together small business and organized labor, you know, which was sort of shorn apart by these changes that came along in the 1980s and the rise of neoliberalism, but as a political force, united together is incredibly powerful. And so we're seeing some of the fruits of that at the federal level here. And so, sort of another thing to think about as you go forward.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Stacy. Barry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, it's a great question. And, one of the things we should all know, and, just sort of remind ourselves is just, over the last couple of years, Australia played a hugely important role in sort of developing a model. Maybe it's not the best model, but it's developing a model for dealing with the power of Google and Facebook that they exercise over the press. There's a lot, and I would like to see that improved in a number of different ways. But the key thing is, it was Australia largely by itself that was able to do that. So that shows you what a single country can achieve acting on its own. We've seen Turkey sort of bring important sort of antitrust lawsuits against Google. Turkey, and these lawsuits and these models, it's like every country around the world can study these, learn from these, build on these, and replicate them in different ways. India is doing lots of interesting work on competition policy. Brazil hopefully will be back in the game. Hopefully soon Brazil will not be run by this pro-monopolist sort of oligarch promoting presidency, and we're going to have a really important sort of set of allies, community of allies in Brazil. But Canada, again, it's like, Canada, can do right now, because Canada has real power. Canada being at the G7 table gives Canada power that Brazil doesn't have. Use that power today. Use the power that you have from sitting at the G7 table to get the OECD back to a traditional role in sort of making the world safe for democracy. Get use your role in the G7 to take on the WTO and probably wipe the WTO off the face of the earth, because the WTO is a pro-monopoly organization. Now I know that there's, the Canadian efforts have not really been well funded in this space. It's like, if Canada is not investing in this this work, Canada is not at the table. That means Canadians are not at the table. It means that Canadians are being manipulated and they're subject to other people's decisions, manipulated by other people's corporations. It's like, Canada is a sovereign nation. It has been a sovereign nation. It's played an enormously important role. And it's time for Canada to get back out there. And it is terrific that you guys are leading the way.
I think that's one of our goals. And I think, like I said, well, Keldon and Robin mentioned, it's not just the three of us, that there's many other people that have been part of getting the conversation to this point. And we're hoping that there's a lot more people out there who want to get involved and help us move the conversation forward. I'm going to pass back to Keldon in a second to wrap up, but Barry and Stacy, thank you both very much for coming. Thank you for spending your time with us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. Like I said many times, probably watch this many times and learn and get something new each single time. So once again, very grateful that you're here. And I'll pass it back to Keldon, for a wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely not too much more to add. Echo Andrew's thanks so much, and thanks to everybody who's tuning in. In particular, Barry, I think that pep talk is useful. I think Canadians spend a lot of time telling ourselves we can't do anything, and we need a shot in the arm every once in a while. So, as I mentioned before, anyone listening, anybody who's participated, we had some good Q&A. We'll reach out to you with answers to those questions. Sorry we weren't able to get to them. But anyone wanting to learn more about how you get involved and help out with camp, please don't hesitate to reach out to us on our social, any of our emails, and the newsletter on the website. So I want to thank everybody for giving us their lunch hour, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.